Hey guys, Buildzoid here from Actually Hardcore Overclocking, and this will be a sort of very general AM4 motherboard roundup. And we're going to start right at the top of the price points with the $350 Crosshair 6 Extreme.
Before getting to that, this content is brought to you by the Thermaltake Flow RGB closed loop liquid cooler, which is a 360mm radiator plus 3 120 fans that are RGB illuminated. The Thermaltake Rain fans at that. This uses a 4.5 gen Asus pump, which is one of the faster pumps. You can learn more at the link in the description below.
Here's the problem with the Crosshair 6 Extreme. The Crosshair 6 Hero exists, and basically what happened when they made the Extreme is they took a Hero. They made it a bit wider, as you can see. The your screw holes finish right here instead. Like you have a screw hole right there, and then the board still extends past that, which the Crosshair 6 Hero doesn't do. But the Crosshair 6 Extreme basically uses that extra width to tack on a million fan headers. Like it has a ton of fan headers. Slightly to relay out the overclocking features like the start button, postcode, reset switch, LN2 jumper, LN2 mode jumper, slow mode switch, RSVD switch, voltage read points, retry button, safe boot button. All of these are located in a better part of the, are better laid out, in my opinion. They're in a better position, more accessible, more usable. But ultimately, ignoring, the RSVD switch, which the RSVD switch is exclusively for LN2 overclockers. It's not like it doesn't literally could not matter less to anybody else on the planet than LN2 over and even if you're an LN2 overclocker, the RSVD switch is not all that useful. Like it is handy, but you can make do without it. It's not absolutely necessary. It does make things a bit simpler though. The thing is, this literally is just sort of a feature relayout. It does get some extra M.2 support. It does get a lot of extra fan headers. It does get a VRM upgrade. This is still the same 8+ 4-phase arrangement. It's just 60 amp international rectifier power stages instead of 40 amp dual NFETs. Not that you can actually see them under the heat sinks, but not that different. Both of them are like. The Crosshair 6 Hero is very overkill for Ryzen. The Crosshair 6 Extreme is more overkill for Ryzen. In fact, the Crosshair 6 Extreme has one of the strongest, is literally in terms of current capability, one of the strongest VRMs on AM4. There's only one other motherboard that matches it for current throughput capability, but it's like you get all the same buttons and switches except the RSVD on the Hero that you do on the 6, on the Extreme, and the Hero is $100 less. So the Extreme really doesn't make a lot of sense, even for extreme overclockers. So this thing has a ridiculously strong VRM, and that's the only good thing about it. By far, this is a 12-phase using 40 amp dual NFETs from Texas Instruments, so same MOSFETs as what you'd find on the Crosshair 6 Hero. There's just 50% more of them in the VCore section. So the VRM on this thing is ridiculously strong. The problem is the rest of the motherboard kind of isn't. I have the Taichi. The memory overclocking is not great. For daily, it's doable. It's just there's a lot of other motherboards out there which do it better. A lot better. And the BIOS general, you have a lot of settings, you have a lot of options, but I can hit the same clocks on motherboards that don't have those options at all. And I can hit those same clocks on motherboards that cost a lot less. This thing, it doesn't carry itself, it doesn't have some killer feature that justifies that $250 price point, unless you consider having the most powerful VRM that you will never, ever, 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 ever get close to using at full capacity, a killer feature. It does have the nicest VRM of all the Ryzen motherboards. It's just too bad that everything else on the board is kind of mediocre, in my opinion. For like everything else on the boards is kind of mediocre, which to the daily user, I think that's more handy. And even for the extreme overclocker, the Taichi and the professional gaming both lack a few settings that are kind of necessary for liquid nitrogen overclocking. And just in general, on LN2, the Taichi is really badly behaved. In fact, it's completely, like, it was a complete catastrophe when I tried it. So I'm actively looking for a replacement motherboard for my X370 Taichi because I can't use it on liquid nitrogen, because it just doesn't work. So yeah, a strong VRM, can certainly complement a motherboard. It doesn't make a board. It can break one. This is the same PCB as the professional gaming. It leaves, I honestly wouldn't recommend, like, I wouldn't buy them. Like, I bought the Taichi, I wouldn't buy it again, is where I'm with it. And same goes for the professional gaming, especially at $250. You can just go buy the Crosshair 6 Hero. Sure, the VRM is weaker, but the rest of the board is a lot better. So, yeah, moving on. I think the best in the $200, sort of $200 to $250 price range, the best balance, I think, would probably be of sort of price, features, VRM, overclocking support, is probably the AX370 Gaming K7. And there's a very good reason for this. Well, I have the X370 Gaming K5, which is the stripped down version of this, as in it lacks quite a lot of the, like, this board, like, the K5 is really good at memory overclocking. The K7 takes everything that's good about the K5 and puts a much better VRM on it, a better BIOS, and fixes a lot of the problems I have with the K5. Which means the K7 is, like, especially at, $210, it's a killer board, in my opinion. Absolutely killer, because you get the best clock gen a Ryzen motherboard could possibly have. The clock gen is a necessary feature on a Ryzen motherboard for BCLK overclocking, which really isn't that handy to most people, but if you want BCLK overclocking done right, Gigabyte has it the best, because they go, the clock gen on these boards goes to 1/100th of a megahertz, which is just, like, completely insane levels of, like, accuracy. Kind of actually completely pointless levels of accuracy, because you're never going to need to fine-tune the CPU clock that much, or the memory clock that much, but it's nice to have the option. I personally only use it at, like, 1/10 of a megahertz increments, not the full 100th range, but it's nice to have the option. The board also has dual BIOS, so if your BIOS flash goes wrong, the board will, literally just trying to turn the board on will recover a bad BIOS flash. It has a clear BIOS button, it has a power button, a reset button, and a postcode. Admittedly, they put the postcode in the wrong place, down on the bottom edge, but it's still there. And honestly, with the K5, I didn't find myself needing a postcode. So, it's a really good mix of overclocking features on this board. Really, really good mix. And you still get, you don't get a particularly strong VRM. You get a 6-phase, well, a 6+4 phase with 6 phases for VCore, using International Rectifier 3553s, which are 40 amp power stages. So as far as the, $200 plus motherboards go, this is definitely the weakest VRM. And even if you go a little bit below $200, yeah, this, well, actually, no. Now, there's one motherboard that has a worse VRM. It's called the X370 X Power, and it's made by MSI. But this, this is literally barely above what the MSI can do. And it's not going to limit you in overclocking. It just means that the VRM on this thing tends to run a bit warm, especially because the VRM heatsink isn't that great. But the rest of the board, like, I feel the rest of the board more than makes up for the anemic, well, it's not anemic, it's just not very, like, the VRM could still be better. It could certainly have a better heatsink, but, it's not like it's going to stop you from hitting 4 gigahertz if your chip is capable of hitting 4 gigahertz. It's just going to do 4 gigahertz while running slightly warmer. So, you know, that's kind of that. And personally, I think that is a trade I'd be willing to make, because at this price point, your only other real option is the Strix X370-F board or the Taichi, which we already went over. The Taichi, in my opinion, is not fun to overclock on. It complains too much, too often. And, you know, I guess if you're doing some very mild overclocking and not doing too much fine-tuning, you're not going to complain. But basically, the moment with the Taichi, the moment I go below like CL16, the board just keeps failing to post all the time. And it's infuriating, because going below, doing 3466 CL16 works. 3466 CL14 doesn't work unless I've booted 3466 CL16 before. Which, you know, it's just like, only board I have that does that. The Taichi. And I find that kind of like, that's a bit of a deal. That, in my opinion, is a complete deal breaker. Other than the K7, your option is the Strix X370-F. The thing is, this loses the postcode. It loses the buttons. It doesn't have dual BIOS. It does still have a clock gen. It doesn't go it's not as granular. It does have a lot stronger VRM. This uses 60 amp international rectifier power stages. And it has 6 phases for V-Core. So this is like the second highest motherboard in terms of peak VRM current capability. This is, you know, this thing's strong. So if you want a great VRM and, you know, don't mind losing things like a postcode and the buttons, and I do believe the K7 is actually regarded as the best memory overclocking motherboard for AM4 as of right now. If you don't mind losing some of the overclockability capabilities that the K7 may offer, this is a really strong option, which I think for the casual user, this would probably be the best. And you do save $20 over the K7 on that. So, you know, goes either way. Personally, as a, you know, more advanced overclocker, I would buy the K7. But if I was doing a build for a friend and I would never ever have to see the system again, I wouldn't mind using the X370, you know, the Strix X370-F either. So both very, very, you know, both nice boards. I just kind of like the feature set of the X370 K7 better than the X370-F. Moving on. Well, we kind of hit a dead zone here between the Strix and the this. And there's a very simple reason for that, okay? The VRM on this, all the MSI boards, like, this VRM is terrible. Well, it's not terrible. It's just not great. This one's not great. This one's not great. Like, none of these is particularly impressive. And they all cost more than this. Which, the thing about the thing about the X370-Pro is you get your Texas Instruments 40 amp dual NFETs, the same MOSFETs you would find on the Crosshair 6 Hero, except now there's 6 of them instead of 8 of them. So you don't get a huge VRM downgrade. It's still plenty for overclocking Ryzen. It's, you know, it's roughly on par, in fact, with like the Gigabyte Gaming K7, arguably. But you do lose a lot of features on this motherboard. Again, no dual BIOS, no buttons, no postcode. But you do get a strong VRM. There's also no clock gen on this thing. So, you know, if you want a strong VRM at a budget, well, at a lower cost, because we're really not in the budget range according to most people. I consider $130 a budget motherboard, because once you go below this price point, the boards start getting really, really bad really, really quick. As literally like the motherboard manufacturer just start axing features and well, quality left, right, and center in order to try fit the you know, the really low price points. But this is a really strong board. This is like probably the last thing I would consider using in terms of VRM quality for a daily build. Though, honorable mention, if you don't mind having a anemic 4-phase VRM with a inadequate heatsink on it, this thing has a real, like, keeps the K7's clock gen, and it has troubleshooting LEDs, no postcode, no buttons. It does have dual BIOS, and it does have the really, really strong clock. You know, the clock gen chip is really, really nice on this thing. I really like this board for everything except the VRM. And then there's the X370 where I like the VRM, but I don't really like the rest of the board. So, you know, at this price point, you can sort of swing between these two. Moving further down the motherboard lineup, this is a really popular board with a lot of people, but you see this and that. And this has a real, like, 40 amp dual NFETs from Texas Instruments 6-phase, and that's a 4. And an anemic 4-phase at that. Like, this has a VRM roughly on par with what you find on the Gigabyte Gaming K5. So, yeah. And it doesn't really, like, it doesn't add anything. There's no clock gen, there's no postcodes or buttons or... Yeah. So, you know, if you're considering this board, buy that one. But let's move out of the $120 range and into the garbage bin. Okay, it's not quite that bad, but we're getting there. So here's the problem I see with a lot of these boards right here at this price point, right? These are all around $100. For 20, well, okay, well, as for $30 more, you can have a way better motherboard than any of these. You know, like, these have, all of these boards down here need a significant amount of airflow over the VRM if you want to run an overclocked 8-core. And, you know, that's just the way it is. And if you moved up to this thing, you wouldn't need to worry about that as much, because this actually has, like, this has a proper good 6-phase. All of these are anemic 4-phase designs. Well, this is technically not an anemic 4-phase design, but the heatsink on that VRM is terrible. And similar goes for this one. Oh, and this one doesn't even have a heatsink, so don't touch that with a 10-foot pole because, well, you know, if the boards with a heatsink need a lot of airflow, how much airflow do you think the boards without one need when they use the exact same MOSFETs in the exact same phase counts? They just didn't bother to put a heatsink on those. Yeah, not great. Really not great. This thing's $90, and, well, this board gets an honorable mention for being, like, of the terrible VRMs, this is the least terrible. It looks like a 6-phase. It's not a 6-phase. It's a 3-phase, but it has a lot of MOSFETs, and it's honestly not that bad. It's just also not great. At least it gets a somewhat decent-looking heatsink. So this could be an option for a budget motherboard, and its derivatives, which its derivative would be, well, its sibling, this, the AB350 Pro 4, same VRM, different color scheme, and the AB350M Pro 4, same VRM, different color scheme. It's still that, you know, I am totally a 6-phase, except running off of a 3-phase voltage controller with no doubling scheme whatsoever. So it's a 3. But the extra components do mean that the VRM has slightly better thermal characteristics. But yeah, you kind of end up, like, with these boards, like the ones with the heatsinks, it's just like you got to be prepared to throw airflow at all of these. And then when you get to the boards with no heatsinks like this thing, it's just don't even try. Like, honestly, I wouldn't even stick an 1800X on this, like, at stock. I wouldn't take an 1800X, put it into this board, and run it at stock settings, because That VRM has no heatsink. Those MOSFETs are rated for 105 degrees. Well, no, the MOSFETs are fine. Well, actually, they probably won't be. So this VRM, because it has no heatsink, I have a board with, well, actually a better version of this, which is depressing. Because, okay, well, just no. This is terrible. Okay, so Asus has a similar 4-phase design to this. Except it has 2 low-side MOSFETs per phase. Here you have 1 low-side MOSFET per phase. So basically the low side is going to be dissipating roughly twice as much heat. And even on the 4-phase design with 2 low-side MOSFETs, this VRM design gets really hot when you run an 8-core. And that's with a heatsink. Without a heatsink, this is going to, and with, you know, the lowered MOSFET count, this is going to be hitting well over 120 degrees, no problem, even with like an 1800X at stock. And you know what the problem with that is? The MOSFETs at 120 are fine. The bigger issue is that, you know, you have these capacitors right here and also right here, and those are all rated for 105 degrees centigrade, and only for 5,000 hours at that temperature level. Also, all of these capacitors on this board are made in Taiwan. They're not Japanese, you know, in case you actually cared about that, because the hour rating and the temperature rating doesn't give it away that, you know, if this area of the board hits 120, then the capacitors are going to be going well over 105, unless you have a significant amount of airflow over the board. So just know. Like B350 boards with no VRM heatsinks, well, at least this isn't B350, but there are B350 boards with no VRM heatsinks, and those, like this. Okay, well, here we have the version with all the extra MOSFETs, and this still completely, no. It's a B350 board, so it technically supports overclocking, but I wouldn't overclock anything other than a quad core on this, because this VRM has no heatsink, and even with the quad core, I'd be very concerned about those MOSFETs and the capacitors, especially the capacitors, because those are a lot more temperature sensitive than the actual MOSFETs behind, you know, right next to them. So yeah, if it doesn't have a heatsink, just don't. Just ignore that it exists. Terrible boards. But hey, at least they're cheap. So yeah, that's pretty much it for all the AM4 motherboards that are currently available. You know, ignoring the whole gap of, you know, basically this from the Taichi, between the Taichi and the K5, it's just kind of ignore all of that. Also, ignore this thing, because this board right here at $130 uses the same 4+2 phase VRM design that you would find on wait, let me find it. Well, it's this VRM, that one. Yeah, this board has the same VRM as that board. You know, so yeah, and that's X370 versus B350, but ultimately, like, what chipset the manufacturers stick on the board doesn't matter. What matters is, well, what they decide to do to the VRM, and in this case, they decided that they wanted to make a crap one, whereas this one's actually good, though this one's on a really steep discount, which, yeah, it just means once this thing is back at normal price, you're kind of like, you kind of end up with motherboards that all need a lot of airflow. It's just, yeah, you're going to need a lot of VRM airflow, and there's no getting around that at the 120 down price points. So, yeah, that's it. Pretty much all of the AM4 motherboards covered. Hopefully, this stops you from buying a motherboard that'll die in a year or two. Well, stops you from buying a motherboard that's completely inadequate for overclocking and killing it, because that's probably what would happen. But yeah, that's it. Thank you for watching. Like, share, subscribe, leave a comment down below. If you would like to support what we do here at Gamers Nexus, there's a Patreon link down in the description. And if you would like to see more content from me, then I have a channel called Actually Hardcore Overclocking, where I do a lot of very overclocking focused things. That's it for the video, and goodbye.